Welcome once again, everyone, to the Roundtable, your editors and publishers podcast here at the American Mind at the Claremont Institute. I'm your host this week, Ryan Williams, president of the Claremont Institute and publisher of the Claremont Review Books and the American Mind. I am joined by managing editor of the American Mind, Mike Sabo, associate editor of the Claremont Review Books, Spencer Clavin, and our now very frequent guest host, Matthew Peterson, roving journalist at large, former expert in LA corruption, the topic of which came up because the New York Post is opening a New York Post LA. So that sounds like it could be pretty exciting. Well, we have to open this week with every scandal these days is some sort of gate since Watergate. So this I saw referred to as double tap in general. So I'm calling it double tap gate. This, of course, has to do with Hegseth, Secretary of War Hegseth, and the elimination of a drug boat in September full of Venezuelan nationals, or a few anyway, smuggling drugs allegedly. Admiral Mitch Bradley is the operation commander, or was the operation commander. He's a former SEAL admiral. And the Washington Post story that recently dropped suggested that Hegseth issued once they hit the boat and there were a couple of survivors, that Hegseth ordered them killed with a second strike, hence the double tap. Hegseth denied it, denied that he gave such an order. And the New York Times, of all places, debunked the Washington Post's story, calling it false, saying that Hegseth, which is what Hegseth said originally, that in fact he did not give the order, that the commander, operational commander Mitch Bradley, had given the order, and that the left wanted to jump on this quickly because it was clear their target was Hegseth. It may or may not be related to this video of, 7 or 8 or 6 or 7 Congress critters on the Democratic side, including Senator Mark Kelly, all of whom were former military of some sort, claiming or issuing the vague instruction to all of the members of the armed services that it was their right and their duty to refuse illegal orders. I think the timeline of it suggests not a direct link between all of them, but maybe. But it is part of this larger operation against Hegseth and against the operations going on in the Caribbean against Venezuela or Venezuelan nationals smuggling drugs. And now, because the New York Times said that the Washington Post was incorrect, their narrative was quickly shifted to Hegseth shifts blame for an act he denied, which was confirmed that he didn't take. So there we are with all of this. I think it speaks to a certain desperation on the left, which is it's maybe a corollary to Trump derangement syndrome, which is Hegseth derangement syndrome. So the op seems to have failed, but even some congressional Republicans now are suggesting they must look into this matter, which is disappointing to some of us because it looks to us to be a transparently political hit on Hegseth rather than some morally righteous objection to kinetic action and then follow on kinetic action. I should just, one last detail that's important. It's perfectly fine under the rules of law and the high seas and piracy and take your pick to strike a boat, and then if it hasn't sunk, to strike it again. So this seems like a much ado about nothing, but we'll see how it develops. So what's your guys' take on all this?
No, I think that's exactly the right take. Like you said, it's just gate after gate after gate. And I think with this one, it's clearly the media, the Democrats, the whole kind of, industrial complex. I mean, just trying to even gin up just something to try to impeach Trump again. I think that's probably what's behind this, I would assume. There was actually a really, really good thread on X, I think, Ryan, that you sent out by Brian Cox. He's an adjunct at Cornell. And he pretty much totally destroys the Washington Post story. He says, the boat wasn't destroyed in the initial attack, but was rather disabled, thus giving, them obviously the green light to hit it again. Another one is, the boat was still basically qualified as a military objective after the initial attack. So the second strike, which people have said, oh, it's a war crime, like it's absolutely not. And he said, I mean, it's all this stuff is a problem. It undermines the military, just going after Hegseth in general like this. It's putting anonymous sources out there. It's a national security risk overall. It's, as he says, troops are going to start questioning in mass what are actually lawful orders. It can corrode good order and discipline in the ranks. So I think this is a problem because it's partisan politics. Obviously, you're trying to get Trump, but it's actually doing real harm and could do real possible harm to U.S. national security. So again, it's Democrats putting their TDS, just hate shirt of Trump, over really the good of the country.
Yeah, the war crime stuff is very, very silly. I mean, I am about the furthest possible thing from a military strategist as I sit here in my purple cardigan with its elbow patches, but I do think even kind of civilians can see what how far away we are from a situation in which loyal soldiers might be called upon to question whether the kind of ripcord break glass in case of emergency situation has emerged where they might have to disobey a direct order. And as a result of that, for some of the reasons that Mike alluded to and that are detailed further in that post, like to suggest that we're there and so that kind of confusion is extraordinarily irresponsible because you're talking there about like full meltdown levels of regime failure, of constitutional disaster. Like we talked a bunch on this podcast about what it means when the military starts to slip its traces and how ultimate a sign that is of severe kind of constitutional problems. So yeah, to kind of associate that disaster scenario with this clearly kind of well within the range of normal military operations sort of thing, especially since we don't really know actually the full details about what went on. There's this suggestion, Ryan, as you said, in the Washington Post that Hegseth gave the order to kill everybody. Was it before the first of the taps? Was it in between taps? Some of this timeline is, I think, kind of left a little murky as I understand it. All of that, therefore, like this is a nothing burger on that level and has only made me realize how broken my brain is because I keep thinking anytime anyone says double tap that they must be referring to some sort of weird and grotesque new Tinder trend that I don't know about. On the other hand, I just want to throw this out there to you guys and see what you make of it. Like, it does raise some larger order questions for me about, like, what is the Trump administration up to vis-a-vis Venezuela? What's its ultimate objective? What does Trump want out of the Maduro regime? Does he want the end of it? I mean, obviously, that's a reasonable thing to want, but in what way does he wish to pursue that? It seems to me, just at a first glance, that he wants extraordinary powers to combat illegal immigration and also reduce the malign influence of these drug cartels, for whom I have no love lost. Let me be clear. This is not like nice business people just happening to kind of float by on our seas and then they're getting attacked for no reason by the evil Pete Hegseth. Like I get that these are bad guys, but these kind of emergency powers or this state of or these hostile actor kind of designations do seem to me like not declarations of war by another means, but potential sort of slippery slopes toward something resembling a state of war with another country. And is that what's going on? Does Trump need to think more seriously about how to present this to the public, given that he is the no new wars president, given that, undeclared war by another means is one of the big criticisms that even his supporters have of previous Republican administrations? Those are the concerns that I think are worthy of more serious discussion, as opposed to the lunacy of, like, is Pete Hegseth a war criminal?
Yeah. I'll just point people to answer one of your questions quickly, Spencer. That's the last one. Former Claremont Lincoln Fellow from years back, Josh Trevino, and his colleague at AFBI, Melissa Ford, have a good piece in National Review. It's paywalled, so go archive your way around it if you don't have a subscription, but it's titled, and it's worth reading. It's kind of a primer on this question: what brought the Trump administration to the brink with the Venezuelan regime? And in précis form, it's the U.S. abandoned a heavy Caribbean and Panama Canal presence in the 90s after the end of the Cold War, or the fall of the wall, the end of the Soviet Union. And what stepped into that vacuum was various sorts of narco states, Venezuela being one, and Mexico being a bigger and somewhat more intractable one, and one that's strategically more difficult for us because it shares a large border with us. So you can reassert the Monroe Doctrine by going after a change of the status quo in Venezuela. You can stop the inflow of drugs, fentanyl, and death attendant to those. You can stop people coming from the region and from Venezuela, and you can try to reassert hemispheric control in light of the pretty robust presence in recent decades of Russia, China, and Iran in places like Venezuela. So it's kind of the place to start if you want a robust Monroe Doctrine, Roosevelt corollary reassertion. That's the argument. Go check it out.
That's incredibly helpful. I'm glad that Trevino wrote that too. I haven't read it, but he wrote it. It's got to be good. He's a smart guy. I mean, I think that is the larger question. And I kind of wonder if all of this isn't a proxy for that, even the drug boat with the lefty media. So
that's interesting.
I'm with you guys, Robbie, on the boat. I mean, it's like how many crimes could a war crime if a war could crime war? I mean, what are we even talking about here? You have a drug boat in international waters. You shoot it twice. There's some convoluted story about how this was killing people. And what's even more interesting than the convoluted story and the obvious organized opposition against Hegseth, which, by the way, includes many Republicans in Congress who can't stand the guy and are creatures of the large bureaucracy at the Pentagon. This is a full-on attack on him and the administration. Most interesting part of it is the fact that the New York Times, as you mentioned, fact-checked the Washington Post. I mean, that to me, like, that's news. I'm interested in that. What's going on there? But looming behind it is like, is this really all they have with, pre-bunking or putting out this thing about, how the soldiers have to not follow unlawful orders? Are they thinking about anything that happens in Venezuela they're going to attack as, an unlawful, certainly this is a classic American argument, an unlawful use of force by the president? And what is going on in Venezuela? I think to Spencer's question, if indeed it is the case that we are reasserting the Monroe Doctrine, which is something I thoroughly support, this is the only place where it makes sense, direct sense, because it directly affects us. It's directed, causally to hurting America for overseas action or intervening in other countries. It would be in this hemisphere to try to solve some of these problems. I'm okay with that, but I think that you can already see the confusion out there on the right, and the administration needs to make that case. It feels like this has been building up for a while, and there hasn't been a lot of talk about it, right? I don't think most people on the right are even really aware of the buildup in Venezuela, unless they're news junkies or news hounds. So maybe they're going to bridge that, when the time comes. But also, you have to wonder if this story isn't really about that conflict. And you already see Schumer using classic American language, right? If there's any action against Venezuela, the president, this is what always happens when you oppose presidential power. Both parties do it. The president is acting as a tyrant and it needs to declare war. It's not that simple at all. This is Schumer bloviating. But, is that something that we think we're going to see? This is going to rise up all of a sudden? Because it sure seems like we're about to do something down there. But it's a little murky, I think, just in terms of the comms so far.
I think that's extraordinarily astute. And if you put what you just said Matt, together with Ryan's very helpful précis of the Trevino piece, then it does kind of illuminate why it's such a problem not to have a serious left in this country. It's occasionally I remember this, that it's funny and kind of fun that our Democratic Party is captured by these loons who want to like trans the inmates or whatever. But it would be more helpful if we could frame these sorts of discussions not in terms of like, oh, Pete Hegseth technically did a war crime, but rather in terms of the actual underlying objection. Like, that's not really, if Pete Hegseth were carrying out these strikes in the optimally pristine possible way, to the very letter of every international convention, would people not be complaining about him or about these operations? No, there would still be stories in the Washington Post and in the press more generally trying to find something wrong with these operations, because the real question on the table is, should we be pursuing them at all? And if so, how? It's certainly clear that, as you say, we're way past the point where we can just say, well, we should only ever do war if we declare war. That mechanism has clearly broken down at several stages into its breakdown. But also, the whole point of the Trump approach to foreign policy is we're not going to, under all manner of false pretexts and highfalutin language, ensnare and snarl Americans in a number of kind of poorly and vaguely defined commitments to international conflict. And so it would behoove us, I think, probably, if in fact it's the Monroe Doctrine we're after, to really say what that looks like, even if included in that is the use of these extraordinary powers that lead us to kind of treat as foreign belligerents civilians who are otherwise really just engaged in kind of criminal activity. All of that seems to me like on the table. But if Trump wants to avoid getting tripped up in this, it seems like he or JD Vance or someone needs to really say, like, this is the theory of the case, and here is how Venezuela fits into a larger picture of the way that we are now going to clean up our backyard and pay attention to this hemisphere, rather than doing as distinct from the thing that you voted for me to end, namely kind of sleepwalking into a bunch of foreign wars.
Yeah, I mean, I just quick on that. I agree. I mean, the larger prudential question is foreign affairs. What are we doing in terms of intervention? What is the case for that? I think that will have to be made to MAGA, right, as well. So the base needs to hear that. People see the administration as standing for non-intervention. Of course, that's not really true. He's a realist. He will intervene when he sees it's in our interests, but the case does need to be made. And I just reiterate, though, like, what you're saying is right, because the problem is the war crime thing. I mean, honest to God, I know I'm not supposed to say retarded anymore, right? I mean, apparently.
No, it's you're allowed. It's
I never call
open
disabled people that word. I defend disabled people who are a blessing, and we protect life at all costs. But I don't call them retards. I call retards. And this is the very important people that deserve to be called that, right? Because the war crime thing it's so laughable. So there's two versions of this. And you guys enlighten me on the larger question. I have no idea. But there's two versions of this when it comes to the media right now. One is they actually don't have like a moral universe to tell narrative stories and do narrative world building with their lives anymore, because they're so spiritually, like, creatively impoverished. So even when they tell a story, it's a legalistic gotcha, right? It's like, this is messed up here, and we have a recording of it, and it violates this, like, our, law. And then the rest of it is just sort of like their little tropes that don't work anymore. And if that's the case, this is just a flop. It's not going to work. It's not going to stop Trump. It's actually completely dumb and stupid, because these are the same people, as everyone's pointed out online, that seem to love war crimes until 5 seconds ago. I mean, there's no, like, all the war crime rhetorical credits that these people have used for the last 20 years, they've been used up, folks. They're gone. Like, no one cares. We know that all of you have, supported various things that were on the edges here and there throughout the world. There's no purchasing power there other than with more DC type people. But the larger question, I think, is very real about, okay, what is the argument for intervention here? And this could actually be, if you give them the 4D chess benefit of the doubt, it's not a dumb move. They're throwing something out in front of bigger action in Venezuela and starting to play with a narrative that they'll develop as it goes on. Does that make sense? Because they know that it's coming and they're going to oppose it and say,
Yeah. No, that does make sense. I mean, it's related to an argument that Kurt Schlichter made, which Ryan also sent around to us, that this is a replacement news story for the other thing that I think we're going to talk about today, which is the shooting in Washington. That there is a kind of media strategy going on, and the outlet conflict of it, the cafeteria spat between the outlets that you discussed, Matt, is also sort of important. I think Washington Post has been changing its approach, at least to the op-ed pages, and it may be that they are now no longer, if they ever were, so simpatico. I don't know anything about I have no inside information, I guess, but it may be that they and the New York Times are less simpatico than they once were. But be that as it may, yeah, it does seem like this is a distraction on two fronts. It's a way of not discussing the still appalling situation vis-a-vis illegal immigration and the people who were let in under Biden with absolutely no vetting whatsoever, who continue to cause terrible problems and to support Trump's case for a kind of hard line on immigration. It's also, yes, a way of not of sort of discrediting whatever the Trump administration is building up to, not by looking at the actual situation on the ground, which is kind of unsympathetic because, again, these are drug runners and bad people. These are not hugely sympathetic protagonists. And when they tried with sort of the deportation situation to find all of these sob stories, it was here's this guy that raped a corpse one time. Aren't you sad that he got deported the wrong way? And everyone was kind of I don't know. I mean, on the list of concerns, so this is perhaps a better way to do this than, oh, the poor Venezuelan drug runners. If you think of yourself as being a left-wing media strategist, who knows?
Yeah, I think that's right. I should add that one other piece of that Trevino article, which I hadn't really thought of, but it makes sense, I guess, is given all those details about the problem of Venezuela in terms of quote unquote refugees and gang members coming into the country from Venezuela. According to that article, a quarter of Venezuela's population has emptied out in the last decade or so, maybe the last 15 years. To Europe, to the rest of the Americas, of course, the United States. So a result you normally only get after a war. So that's pretty extraordinary. So there's the refugee problem. There's the narco problem, the drug runner problem, narco cartel state problem. There's the reassertion of Monroe Doctrine problem, et cetera, et cetera. So his point was stated policy objectives on the foreign policy and immigration front from DHS, the Department of War, the Vice President, and the President all have converged on this being a good arena or area or theater to go hard. So that's sometimes you get forceful execution of policy when you have a bunch of principals who want it done more for maybe adjacent reasons, if not many overlapping reasons. So I thought that was a pretty good insight from that piece. It takes us to the Afghan national shooting. So for those of you living under a rock, I should rephrase that. Either living under a rock or having a healthy diet of media and politics media consumption, unlike us.
Being blissfully uncorrupted by the fire hose of useless information under which we all labor daily. Yes, and God bless you for it. Never change. Go on.
An Afghan national who it looks like worked with the CIA as a translator and other stuff in Afghanistan, was part of the withdrawal and repatriation of a good portion of Afghan nationals who helped the U.S. or were adjacent or were family members of those who helped the U.S. Anyway, he seemed to be a bit of a loner as the story keeps developing. Kind of a sad young guy who didn't have much contact with the outside world for big stretches of time. Anyway, he shot 2 National Guardsmen in D.C. last week, a few blocks from the White House. And now one of them is certainly dead. I think both are dead now. The whole thing's very unfortunate. The U.S. Custom and Immigration Service is suspending all Afghan national immigration pending a review and audit of that whole program. And it seems to vindicate Trump and out of office Trump's criticisms of Biden on a few levels, which is an abuse of the refugee program and also the disaster of the withdrawal from Afghanistan and the nature in which it was executed, even though at a certain level, both Trump and Biden wanted to shut down that 18-year-old war or 20-year-old war. So it's, and as I think Spencer mentioned, so part of this pivot to Hegseth in Venezuela is to take that out of the media, something that seems to be pretty embarrassing for the previous administration, which means embarrassing for Democrats and snarls a bunch of their media narratives about the blessedness of immigrants of all the colors of Benetton, for a nice throwback reference, short way of throwback reference.
Can you paint with all the colors of the wind, Ryan? Yeah, I mean, if I were a Trump media strategist, which would be a terrible error on everyone's parts, but if for some reason they asked me like what to do on immigration, I think it's sort of sad, but I would have to say, this is the thing you focus on. You don't like post giblified pictures of abuelitas crying or whatever. You don't get tangled up in the meme wars. You just keep returning to the fact that for 4 years, our border did not exist. And there were many, many problems with immigration before then. But under Biden, there was really nobody manning the gates. And the knock-on effects of that have not been fixed even by the very vigorous patrol and kind of rectification, even by the very vigorous measures that Trump took upon taking office for the second time to close down the border. Like, there are really, really serious and lasting after effects of the way Biden mishandled or just did not at all handle this issue. And so, as predicted, the left and the Democrats are doing their best to make this now about mean Trump doing nasty things and making hard choices. And there are hard choices on immigration. There are genuinely difficult and painful decisions that you have to make in a situation like ours, which is already so far deteriorated that you can't just decide to police the border well. You actually have to decide how to deal with the fact that the border was badly policed. Like, that does create genuinely painful, agonizing moral quandaries. But this ain't one, right? The low-hanging fruit is still there. These guys keep coming up again and again. Foreign nationals or people who were let in, on asylum or whatever, who turn out to have been bad actors that were poorly vetted or not vetted at all, and who totally make the case for Trump on his signature issue. It sucks that bleak reality is one of the things that sort of justifies or at least does credit to Trump's political instincts, but that's the situation. So yeah, I mean, this is the stuff that should be obvious to everybody, and I think is a kind of really basic, easy issue for him to go for, and is probably why it was buried as a story. I mean, it didn't help that it happened, I think, as I recall, over the Thanksgiving holiday, but that then was sort of compounded by this nonsense about Hegseth and war crimes. when really I think, like we have not moved past the point where there are some really obvious wins for Trump to pick up on immigration. I mean, I wish we had, but we have not.
Yeah, Spencer, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, overall, this seems to be a self-inflicted loss. I mean, you look at Afghanistan just pouring lives, treasure, and then what did we do? Then we took a bunch of people who, helped us, I'm sure, in various ways, were our friends. And I just saw, this was a report of Front Page magazine. So this is not counting the supportive role in 9/11. Afghan Muslims in America have killed 56 people and wounded 92 others. And those were just attacks that had basically succeeded. You have, during the Biden administration, they brought over 100,000 Afghans to America. They distributed over 50,000 SIV visas to supposed allies. And then also another thing, too, that's probably not mentioned as much. I mean, this even affects red states like Texas. Those states are getting tons of money for resettling Afghans. You look at Houston, Austin, San Antonio, Dallas, everywhere. I mean, obviously the big cities. And I think you're going to find that in blue states. But, again, in Texas, you're also going to find that in red states. Jeremy Carl actually has a great piece coming out pretty much right as we end this. I'm going to post it. And he talks about these issues. He cites Joe Kent, who's the director of the National Counterterrorism Center. And he talks about, look, I think this really gets at it. Vetting a foreigner in a war zone to determine if he will fight a common enemy is vastly different than vetting a foreigner to see if he is suitable to live in our country. I mean, what about our traditions, our mores, our habits, our virtues as a people? I think of James Madison, I think in Federalist 54, Republican government takes a certain degree of virtue, right? Does somebody, just some random Afghan have that by nature? I don't think so. And I think we're seeing more and more and more just the disastrous results of, not only Biden's open border policies. I mean, that was certainly true, but are the open border policies essentially, I mean, for previous administrations. I mean, it had to get this bad for us to really acknowledge this, see a problem. I mean, that's one of the reasons why Trump won, even in 2016. He said the things that other people wouldn't say, the things that they wouldn't talk about, and he said them. And, obviously the resulting actions he's taken, a halt to Afghan resettlement, hopefully we'll see a complete reversal. We'll see them settled, hopefully out of the U.S. and elsewhere. But, and it's, insanely unfortunate. I mean, just very sad what happened, obviously, the day right before Thanksgiving. And I just hope that, some good can come out of that. And I think that, resettlement out of the U.S. would be a very good thing for our refugee policy in general.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that good for a minute. So Trump did put out a long tweet, in which he did call walls, as what I was alluding to earlier, as well as basically say remigration is the way to go. We're going to get rid of all these people. I don't care anymore. And that was a signature moment, sort of reasserting in an even bolder way what the campaign was about. But when I watch this, I always have this devil on my shoulder that's, somehow in my head. I wish I could get it out. And it's a Republican campaign consultant. I just know what these people say, and I can't get it out of my head because I can see, partly because of the timing and the media moves on. Okay, the scene looks something like this. First off, it's a winning issue. It's time to attack. Right? If you have two armies in a battlefield, the other army's in disarray. They've been hammering about this narrative for a while, and this narrative is all of a sudden completely destroyed when this Afghani guy, who's also a CIA operative, after people like our CIA ex-CIA members of Congress are talking about how the National Guard is going to cause violence because they're in these cities, all of a sudden, the National Guard is attacked by this guy who there's a lot of details you could go into about it, but it's okay. This just happened. But the whole online world, the very online world, blows up. Anyone paying attention who's MAGA Maha, just, it's time to charge. And they charge. I mean, it's different than in the past. It's different in past times. The entire online riot was like, no, we're done with all of this noise. And the administration better get its ass in gear. I mean, that's what everyone was saying. There was no hesitation, right? It was, this is what the new right is, and you guys better actually do something because we are very, very angry about what's going on. And then you see in response Trump dropped this bomb of a tweet. Now, if I'm the devil on my shoulder, right, is saying, okay, but you guys are getting out too far over your skis because you don't actually have the support. It's like you sent all the Navy SEALs, right, to charge, or all the great warriors to charge in this big battle, but do they actually have the base coming up behind them? Do people actually know about this story? Do they have the context? Is the administration prepared to deliver that message in ways that make sense, as you guys are talking about over and over again in the coming weeks? Or is the administration itself divided with people who don't understand that agenda, right, and are fighting amongst themselves? And so Trump blurted out something that is the good side of that debate, but can you carry through? And don't you even risk like cutting off, all these good people because he's going to say this, but can he even deliver? I can see the negative, or I don't want to use their names, but a campaign consultant will be like, well, we're trying to get the normie, and this isn't helping get the normie, and this isn't going to help you ultimately achieve your goals and your policy objectives. That is what even some of the smartest who aren't completely anti-Trump, who in fact work for Trump, that is what they might in fact say. And then the other side of that, you go, what the hell did that? What the other side of that debate is? What did we just vote for? You guys better get your act together, and you better start doing this, and you better start moving in the right direction. So, ultimately, I think it's kind of up in the air to see whether good comes out of it, but it certainly was a tragic, but through that tragedy, a winning moment for the argument that needs to be made. That's very commonsensical, and it was another Overton window shift for the right and everyone who does support Trump and wants to see, people actually moved the hell out of this country who don't belong here and shouldn't be here. So that part's good. It's more the effect, right, it's going to have. I think a lot of that depends on how organized the administration is in disseminating this message and actually executing on it, because the risk right now is not only is the left attacking you, but I don't think that moment last week was a time where it just didn't matter as much as people love Trump or whatever else. It wasn't anti-Trump at all. Nothing else mattered other than you guys better actually implement this mandate. What the hell is going on? And you see that sentiment popping up all over the place on the right. So, politics is hard. Holding all that together is something that admin's going to have to do.
Not too long ago, we were all having these debates over whether America is a creedal nation, whether we're defined by our ideas and so forth. And I'm probably more of an ideas enjoyer than perhaps your average new rightist. Like, I think there are some very significant creedal dimensions to American identity and what it means to be an American. But the follow-on from that is that if you think that's true, you must therefore say that for people to become Americans, they have to believe, at least in part, in those ideas, right? So that would mean that you can't hold both the American is an idea proposition in your mind, and at the same time, the anybody who needs to can come here in your mind, right? You can certainly say, as we did in the wake of the Afghanistan disaster, that it was shameful not to bring people who had given or risked their lives to help us. It was shameful not to rescue those people from the debacle that Biden created with his withdrawal. That's a totally plausible version of that argument. It's not plausible to say, because we created this debacle and we feel guilty about it, we have a moral obligation to shelter absolutely anybody that is displaced by the resulting turmoil in Afghanistan. Because then you do get into this thing where it's like, well, okay, but how many people can we take from this admittedly foreign and in many cases hostile nation, right? That's why we were over there in the first place. That's why the nation building stuff didn't work, is because of the extraordinary cultural and historic distance between our polity and theirs. And now you're going to say, well, like, you have to sort of shelter the huddled masses that are fleeing from Afghanistan, whether or not they had anything to do with helping in our war effort, whether or not they evince any serious commitment to the American ideal that we're all supposed to be into, right? I mean, that stuff just is so obviously bankrupt that, again, it does feel like there is a really common sense, straightforward, but also robust message for Trump here, which is, look, like, nobody likes these terrible kind of hard choices that we have to make. But there are some really easy, basic things that we can say, like no country can assimilate vast quantities of unvetted foreign nationals in such a short space of time. And arguably, America especially can't do that because we do actually have like a certain degree of training that is required, or at least we have to evaluate whether people who come in are on the same page as us about what it means to be an American, because otherwise it doesn't mean anything. Otherwise it is just this sort of goodie bag of benefits that we hand out to anybody that can game the system well enough to come in here. And yeah,
unless of course you wanted a number of numberless
what?
serfs
No,
who are just there to serve you like so much chattel.
Matt, you're going to make me cite the Edict of Caracalla again on this podcast. I don't know how many times I've belabored this point with our listeners. The Edict of Caracalla, right? Extending Rome's citizenship far and wide. The biggest citizenship grant maybe in history. I'm not sure if that's true or not. But in any case, why? Because they needed to swell their ranks, right? They needed a kind of docile and easily manipulable vast mass of people who would kind of take the benefits of citizenry without the responsibilities. Yeah, I mean, this is a thing. I'm not attributing this strategy to any particular individual, but this is a thing that people, a way that people think and continue to think.
To quote a banned thinker, although he's had a bit of a renaissance, at least in certain sections of the right, is that his initials are SS. Invade the world, invite the world. That's been the unholy alliance between them.
Sailor's back, baby. Yeah. He's totally rehabilitated.
It's been the establishment's, the bipartisan establishment's modus operandi for pretty much the whole post-Cold War era. And part of the reason everyone is so exercised by Trump and Vance and everyone else, going back to the first administration, long before Vance was even in national office. Well, not long before, but before Vance was in national office. And that's all unraveling. And a lot of people's oxes are getting gored, their policy oxes, and even in some instances, their livelihood oxes, material oxes. I'll stop with the oxes.
they're oxes. They're actual oxen.
Yes. You have a certain segment of the DC establishment, right and left, who are finding their lives impoverished, their fortunes growing a lot less quickly, and their policy priorities, which they held a certain set of policies as somehow identical with American democracy in the post-war era, and Trump came along and said no, and a lot of voters agreed with him. And so, just to get back to Matt's point, what especially a lot of the base on the right wants is execution on the various aspects of that resounding no from Trump to the establishment. And so that's the through line of both the Hegseth business and the Afghan national business and the larger refugee question. That is to say, how I've posed this question to lefties, and they either willfully misinterpret it and accuse me of something bad, or they can't really answer, which is, well, but surely at some point an endlessly heterogeneous society will cease to be America or small or Republican, right? It's a very perplexing question to ask them, because the tenets of the justice of their whole cosmology, forgive me, really pretentious way of saying their deeply held beliefs and values resist any firm answer to that question. It's kind of the moral and cultural version of the question our colleague Bill Voegeli asked in a book, 20 years ago, maybe 18 years ago, about the liberal welfare state, which is, but surely at some point, the progressive left on material welfare state stuff and spending will say, yes, this is enough. But Bill's book title was Never Enough, meaning You had this material side of liberalism that always has to cast itself onto further vistas and the future and more. And then on the cultural, immigration, civic cohesion side, you just have to keep pushing the envelope, whether it's a mix of old white guilt or American imperialist guilt or whatever, take your pick, or just some stupid thing that's stuck in your brain that you learned at a corrupt liberal arts college. Take your pick. It's the kind of twin pathologies of those, and the fact that we don't have endless money and we don't have endless resources to assimilate the entire globe into America, that has led a lot of citizens taking their pick of pieces of either of those issues and saying, no, thank you. This seems crazy.
I kind of like the tenets of the justice of their cosmology. It's, it's a little purple, but so is my sweater. It's got a kind of ring to it.
I'm going to mandate that somebody use that in the American mind in like the next week or two, or I'm just going to insert it myself into a piece. So
we're dangerously close to calling this episode "Tenets of the Justice of Cosmology." It's like an MCU
Please don't
movie.
Immortalize my flowery bull.
What else are we going to immortalize? Better yours than anyone else's.
I wanted to tee something up quickly for Mike, and we can get Matt's rant on it, because I know he's had one stored up since we talked about it a bit last week, which is FBI and competence. There's this new report out, so Mike, catch us up on this, and we can talk about it.
Sure. So Miranda Devine at the New York Post writes about this new report, and it's written by kind of an alliance of active duty retired agents and analysts. And this is cataloging really the first 6 months of Kash Patel's leadership in the FBI, and it's pretty devastating from what how she talks about it. Quotes, Patel is in over his head. Dan Bongino is something of a clown. It describes the FBI under Patel as a rudderless ship, all effed up. Another source said Patel is not very good, maybe insecure, and lacks the requisite experience or the measured self-confidence to be FBI director. They did note he's personally likable, but he's created a culture of mistrust and uncertainty among the ranks. In there, and I'm sure Matt is going to want to talk about this, but there's a famous story now that's definitely been out there about Patel, kind of his behavior in Salt Lake City after the Charlie Kirk assassination. He was accused of giving basically premature remarks, basically taking credit for things that other agencies have done. There's one specific one on the jacket, basically like a bulletproof vest, essentially. Matt, if you want to talk about that, go for it.
You mean coming out of the plane with a jacket?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, yeah, for his photo op, he needed a jacket, and they had to procure one from a female agent, and he needed, the Velcro, all the stuff on it too, for the sake of the photo op. And, this stuff is silly, but it's indicative of something that people have been saying for a while. And I held fire on this at Blaze, in fact, for many months. But let's just back up real quick. I mean, so first off, everyone here on this podcast was perfectly fine with Kash Patel. Like, no one was anti-Kash Patel going to the FBI director, going to become FBI director. It's fine. Like, that was Trump's pick. Everyone here was for it. I was on a whole show, advocating for this. Like, this is what the president wants. He's, there's a lot of reason to think he could go in and clean house. He's outside the system. So there's a lot of hope that he would be good. And certainly Dan Bongino, no hate in my heart or anti anything. Dan Bongino has been friendly to causes, people, organizations, like Claremont in the past, right? For instance, he's where everyone's friends in media with Dan in some way, or thinks highly of him as a media guy. So there's no one, coming to this from the right who has some kind of axe to grind. But what ended up happening was it was very troubling over the course of months as they kind of settled in. And I kept on telling all these people, settle down. This is an incredibly difficult job. They're being thrown into a pit of vipers. There's a few guys in the captain's chambers. The entire ship's full of pirates. Like, these people all hate them. This is a very difficult job they have in front of them. You got to give them time, give them time. And now we're at the point where, this stuff is finally breaking open into the public. And I'll just say, you can't write it off, as Miranda Devine says. My own Blaze people would say the same thing. I've been hearing this for a long time. You can't write it off and say these were all like deep state operators. They're not. These are people who are on the team Reform the FBI, who are against DEI. These are people who are inside as well as outside the FBI. And they're like the remnant. And they're saying, no, this guy won't cut it. And I guess I'll just put it this way: with all the crazy stuff with these stories and putting on the jacket and sort of LARPing, wanting the photo up, I just looked at the fact pattern a while ago and realized they were right, because I didn't see someone who was acting as if he was head of the FBI. And Bongino is not acting as COO either. He's acting as sort of comms. And so it's like, who's running the actual FBI? Because I don't see these guys doing that. He's just not acting like someone who is director. It's like he is playing a part. And that's very troubling. The other thing is, what's the plan to reform, right, this massive beast? Everyone give them the benefit of the doubt. It's a very difficult task. That plan has never been clear. And, there's mistakes here and there. I was willing to spot them that. But now we're at the point where this is just a disaster. I mean, this is one of the most important agencies in the entire federal government. We all know how bad it is. It represents law and order. They're the cops of the national government. And now we're at the point where, there's really serious questions that need to be asked. And at the end of the day, to me, I'd like to just fast forward and say, look, we don't have time for this horse crap. We need people who can go in there, have a plan, and start doing things well. And that doesn't seem to be happening. So heads should be on the chopping block. And with Bongino, again, I think he's probably a great guy trying to do great stuff. But his response to Miranda Devine, calling her deep state divine because she's publishing these, measured critiques of the FBI, is just, it's over the top. Like, you got to get off Twitter, man. I mean, deep state divine, like Miranda Devine, who she won the award like last year from, Real Clear. I mean, she's done incredible journalistic work against the deep state. This is the Biden laptop lady. We're going to call her deep state divine. Like, this is jumping the shark, man. You can't do this. And what it looks like, a guy's in a very weak position, and they're striking back at people on the right who are criticizing with a thin skin. And meanwhile, we're not sure what the plan is or what's getting done. So anyway, that's my hopefully measured rant. And I'm kind of over it. I mean, I think more will be coming out. I think this will go on for a while. I've just seen too many actions that, most charitably, I'll put it, just show that it's not clear who's in charge of the FBI. It doesn't seem to be Kash Patel.
I mean, this is like, I'm even less qualified to talk about this than about the military, but it does raise, the article Mike sent around certainly raises for me the question, like, when Trump appointed Hegseth and Patel and Bongino, there was a spate, a flurry, if you will, of opinion pieces about how he was appointing a bunch of amateurs. These were incompetents selected from the podosphere. They had no experience. They were totally incompetent to manage these incredibly complex bureaucratic organizations. And stories like this one sort of give credence to those criticisms, right? I mean, they add fuel to that fire, which is a rough spot for Trump's appointees to be in, because the whole thesis of this part of Trump's second term was, we can get hyper competent people who nevertheless are not part of the system, because the system is the problem. So what we need is no nonsense, but also skilled and trained individuals who can recognize when they're being had and push their agenda forward in an assertive, meaningful way, while dodging the various booby traps and wires and tripwires and snares that will be laid for them by career bureaucrats. And it seems like that approach has worked in the case of Pete Hegseth, and maybe not so much in the case of Kash Patel. I mean, again, I'm the last person you would ever put in any of these roles, so it's hard for me to feel competent to judge, but it does sound like this is the kind of thing that Trump's adversaries will be delighted to see. They'll be very happy that to have their priors confirmed in this way, which is bad news bears.
Yeah, let me say it because since I'm in a very free position as not representing any news agency or speaking for the Claremont Institute, even though I do many things with the Claremont Institute, I can just I think that that's well said, and I think it's right. I mean, I think that there was a roll of the dice on some of these candidates. And again, I wish Kash Patel and Dan Bongino well. I want them to kick butt at their job and do awesome. But I don't see that happening. And there's a little bit of roll of the dice where the outsider is sometimes not going to be up to the task. And other times they might be able to cut through and break the ice with the right people and do some stuff. I think a large part of it is, do you have a plan and what kind of people do you have with you? So I think it was kind of a little bit of a roll of the dice. And I think some of those arguments were correct. I don't think that they were well-intentioned, many of them. They're coming from Trump detractors who want to keep the deep state operating, whether they're Republican or Democrat. But I do think that this is a case in which everyone wanted and expected better. That hasn't happened. This is an enormous task, but it's a task that has to get done. I mean, we know what the FBI did the last 10 years. This is, completely destabilized the American regime and American government. And so if we got a guy worried about putting on a jacket and, Velcro patches to look cool, I mean, we do not have time. We don't have time for another second of that. This is serious. We're not even going to bring up another agency we haven't talked about in this podcast and probably shouldn't, because we all want to, we all want to
dismantle it, abolish it.
Yeah. But there really is just a lot of reform that needs to happen in a very serious way. And I think that you roll the dice when you bring in the outsiders, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, but that's okay. It's no egg on anyone's face. It's worth a try, right? But we don't. Trump used to be good. He was good at this before. I believe there will be changes coming, into the new year before the midterms. But remember, he had no problem in the past trading people out if they weren't working.
Yeah, maybe a model here is
it can also be really good, and he needs to do that here. Reassess. See who's able to do it and who's not. It's not nothing personal against them, but we have things that have to get done or everyone loses. And frankly, if that happens, everyone in the administration is going to be in jail anyway in a few years. So, it's kind of sink or swim time.
Yeah, that makes me wonder if a model or a precedent for how to proceed here is what happened with Doge. It was said of Doge that this had been tried a million times, and if the experts couldn't do it under Reagan, and if they couldn't do it under Clinton, then they certainly weren't going to do it under Elon Musk. And elements of that proved to be true, right? There were definitely, as the thing started to wobble on its axles, they started making promises to cut these vast amounts of money that they couldn't deliver on. But on the way, you got some very skilled and ambitious and innovative young guys at high levels involved in the running of the government. And that was a good thing. And so there were positive elements of the kind of move fast and break things approach. And then there were parts of it that Trump had to kind of shed as he went forward. And that, as you say, Matt, is no great catastrophe if he does it, if he acts the same way here.
Yeah, it's a got to experiment. No one knows how to solve this. Trump's the only one who can solve it. He's the only one who's better in position and has had the will to do it. So a real quick on Doge. I think it'd be very interesting if someone wrote the real history of the life and death of Doge at some point, because it was insanely popular. And to my knowledge, it still exists in the form of those talented people who in some departments and agencies still are there with the capability to actually show political decision makers the money coming in and out, which they wouldn't have had if not for Doge. So that's incredibly good. I am not convinced that Doge left for good reasons. I suspect that political insiders killed Doge, and Republicans in Congress quietly did not like a centralized website, being controlled with grant power. And so I think it was an inside job, is my suspicion. But based on more than just speculation, there's some real evidence for it. But either way, I think you're right. It's like move fast, break things. You're going to win some, lose some. That's fine. It's okay. We don't need this tight, the administration is worse sometimes has this vibe like any criticism of any kind is terrible, blah, blah, blah. No, people want the mandate implemented, and it's not anti-Trump. They love Trump. They want to make sure that he's putting the best people in there, and so does he. And so there's no egg on his face. It's like, we tried that, didn't work. That's too bad. But, this is not like happy fun times. We're not just, we're and it's not happy fun times for anyone in the administration. Like, what the hell do you think is going to happen if you lose? If you lose this, you lose the base. What do you think is going to happen in a few years? Forget about whatever even if you're a grifter or you just don't care, you're just a careerist, you're going to be screwed anyway, and if you care, you're going to be doubly screwed because they're going to especially come after you. So, I feel like I'm just speaking for where people are at here. And I think that the administration, in large part, does get it and will make moves. But I just have to say, it's troubling, but the silver lining is I see so many people who see it and they're not afraid to speak out. And that's good for MAGA. That's good for Trump, and it's good for the movement.
One thing I think we can all agree, some experiments succeed, some fail, some elements of Doge live on, some have been dismantled, but Big Balls never dies, and we must protect him with our lives. Big Balls rides at dawn. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That's well, we've gone a little over, so I'm going to, boys, hold your cultural recommendations. I'm just going to do one because if any people are inclined to go try to see it, it's not a small undertaking from the United States, but our chairman, Tom Klingenstein, who's also a playwright on the side amongst his many other passions, has a play that originally was off Broadway called Our American Queen, which is about Kate Chase. It's a love story, as most of Tom's plays are, but set in the time of Abraham Lincoln. Tom is a great Lincoln admirer and knows a lot about the era and about Lincoln. So Kate Chase, who's the daughter of Salmon Chase, who's running against Lincoln, she has to choose between true love or a fortune in the form of two different possible husbands and suitors. And she loves her father dearly, and the fortune would help her father's political career. So that's basically the dramatic tension set up in the play. It's playing at the Bridewell Theatre in London, the sort of east side of London. Opening night is January 9th. So if anyone's got some discretionary funds, will otherwise be in London, or wants an excuse to go to London, it's a good little play, and there'll be a cohort of us out there. So at least for that opening night. So go check it out. And with that, I will thank you all once again for listening and watching the Roundtable. If you want to learn more about Claremont, go to claremont.org. If you'd like to support our work, claremont.org/donate. Go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com. The new double issue anniversary, 25th anniversary issue of the Claremont Review Books is at the printer. It will be online or shortly, Spencer.
Only those who watch on YouTube can see me pumping my fist in triumph after this. These weeks and weeks and weeks of assembling this giant behemoth, which will drop. This time we're sending 100. That's right.
156 pages.
56 even. Okay. We've added 2 more in the time that we've been recording this podcast. But this time we're not just sending a carrier pigeon. We're sending 2 giant prehistoric cranes to wing through the air and drop it on your doorstep. And you're going to miss that whole experience if you don't go to ClaremontReviewBooks.com and sign up. But it actually is great. I mean, it's not just big, it's good. There's a lot of good stuff in there. It's a big, beautiful issue.
Chris Caldwell on Zoran Mamdani, Helen Andrews on Charlie Kirk, Charles Kessler's remarks from our CRB gala, and much, much, much more.
So much more to be discussed at our sister podcast, The Close Read. Barry Strauss on Suetonius, a great piece. There's lots of good stuff in there.
Yeah, so go check it out. Subscribe if you don't. It'll be a perfect bound double issue, rare for the Claremont Review Books. So it'll be a keeper. And of course, go to AmericanMind.org to see all of Mike Szabo and Spencer Klavin's handiwork, and dc.claremont.org for the latest on our work in Washington. Please rate, review the show, spread it far and wide, recommend it to friends. And thank you all for listening and watching. We'll talk to you next week.